will tell of the decree of the living, mighty God, who said to me, "You are my child." Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the earth itself your inheritance. We gather today for a very solemn and sacred occasion, our traditional Transgender Day of Remembrance. It is bewildering in a sense that we must celebrate this day, for it makes no sense for people who have found and lived their authentic selves to be murdered for that. Thurman calls each of us to search and discover our authentic selves. He said, there is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in your soul. And if you cannot hear it, you will never find whatever it is for which you are searching. And if you hear it and then do not follow it, it would be better that you had never been born. You are the only you that has ever lived. Your idiom is the only idiom of its kind in all of existence. And if you cannot hear the sound of genuine in you, you will all of your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else holds. This is a huge call and challenge for each of us every day to release the strings of others defining who we are, telling us what to do or not to do, stealing our souls to fit into compromised binaries that reject the creativity of our non-binary creator. The author of Psalm 2, that I read at the very beginning, says that those who affirm what God has done in their lives, if they ask, will have the inheritance of the earth as their inheritance. Does that sound like God is upset, denying blessings, or creating or regretting what has been created? I have found it difficult to understand what it is about our transgender kinfolk that upsets others and causes them to unleash malevolent forces against them. I just don't understand it. Nothing about it makes sense to me. We should welcome this expansion of gender expressions. We must mourn today the deaths of our kinfolk through violence and support this community with our resources. Images of God desecrated. Yet, we also cherish the lives lost and their time with us, as Dr. Benton said, often very brief time with us. We do this in order to move forward within the midst of tragedy, to see possibilities for creatively and assertively working for different realities. This is a responsibility of community. Why do we gather today to say no to the well-funded annihilation unleashed against this community? 600 bills have been brought before legislatures throughout this country to deny their rights and even status as human beings. $214 million was spent vilifying the trans community during the last presidential election. Mark Morris Reed says that the central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds which bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. If you look at the written message that was sent to you, you will find again the list of transgender persons killed this year, the list that Dr. Benton read. Well, this is the first time, and I was really reluctant, that our speaker for our Transgender Day of Remembrance service has not been transgender. Again, we began with our own now, Elena Rose Vera, who was then ordained at this church in 2010. And ever since we've had a transgender person to speak for us on this day. And I say this because it is very difficult for us to understand what many undergo. One of the reasons I began this was one of our Howard Thurman speakers years ago, Leslie Feinberg, and I met when I was at Starkey School for Ministry. And just talking with Leslie brought me to tears. To go to a physician and to have the physician, after you interest, to look at you and refuse to give you service. So she, Leslie, had to, our Leslie's own pocket, working class person, find alternative physicians who would help. The same thing was true with the student in one of my classes. You go to the doctor. Sorry. I have a student now who is wondering if with the Trump administration's victory, if they'll be able to get the surgery that they need. I was not able to find a transgender speaker for today's service. But I felt it was important to try to include at least a couple of transgender voices in our service. There is a website called In Flesh, and this is a conversation about God and gender that I found on that website. At first, I thought I would try to summarize the conversation, but I decided just not to read it in full to you. There are some interesting insights, I think fabulous insights about God and gender that I hope that we will take with us as we go from this place. Here's one, Elena Kala. And some of you won't be able to understand it because a lot of L's and I tend to think of God. I'm very pen, P-E-N. I don't know if that was this translation in this clause. I'm being honest in that in my experience of God and my belief about God is that God is in and through all things. To take a beat from Paul, who was taking a beat from the Greeks. But so in that way, I'm definitely, my understanding of God has God is gender full, G-E-N-D-R-F-U-L-L, gender full. And in that way, to those who are without gender, those who are gender or God is as much gender, there's all this room, this galaxy of gender. And I see God in all of it. And yet there's another part of me that speaks more to the liberation theology. And we talk about preferential option for the poor, about God having a preferential option for the poor. The gospel being a preferential option for the poor. But really, I think that's speaking directly to the preferential option for the oppressed. And so I see God, and I think the way we talk about God needs to be shaped by those systems. Because unless we're identifying God with whatever gender is being oppressed, or whatever person is being oppressed, in whichever situation, then the less honest view we have of God. If we truly believe, if you're a Christian, you truly believe that the most honest example of God and the grace and example of God that we have in Scripture is, a God who is crucified. And it is the oppressed state, My God can definitely look like a man, but it's not going to be a man in power. It's going to be in a till, My God can look like a woman, but it's not going to be, my God is always going to be gender in a way that makes me question. And it doesn't leave me comfortable. And not in a way that I feel like God is in a position of oppression and power over, but who am I oppressing? That is the question I have to ask myself. And that is how I should see God as who am I right now? Who am I exercising power over? And even if it's unintentional. Night response. Wow. It makes me think about like a reflection of God. And I've been learning about that, from church and from my grandma's, we're created in God's image. So therefore, you want to live your life as a reflection of God in the best way possible. And then, if you sin, and Jesus already took care of that. But what to me is most interesting when I hear y'all talking about this is like, the stepping away from and then stepping in or stepping into different parts of understanding of God. And then that reflecting on one's different genders God can embody. I'm using air quotes around embody, but I am curious about how has your gender life, because there is some satisfaction I hear, just like, the evolution of, maybe God has a gender, or, God being reflected in different ways, but has there been an unsatisfied, like a type of unsatisfaction you get when you deal with, like God having any gender, or like trying to reflect like having that conversation of like, who am I talking to? And then like, but how am I talking to you? How you're understanding me, when you're navigating the world as a certain gender or not, having a certain gender to kind of specify the question with an example of like, when I started imagining God as trans, that was really important to me, because it was like, okay, now to me, like, because I just want to fist fight God. Like, that's why I study theology, or like people are like, why do you want to do that? Like funding on a Sierra, on a fist fight. God, like I'm trying to go to heaven to fist fight. Like this isn't a metaphorical thing. Like this is a brawl we're having in a back alley. But anyway, but when I imagine God as transgender, it was like a whole new world opened up for me, because it was like, okay, now I can see God understanding both like my life growing up as a girl, but also the way in which I'm trying to live life as a man. And like how it's always in flux and in conversation, even for myself. So it looks like I'm always trying to be, I guess, confrontational with God about it. So how does that do? Does that work for y'all? Or like, is it, does it like reflect that way, or question? These are reflections of two transgender people struggling with the idea of God, with gender, and how that applies to them. And in the second reading, the person finding support and strength when that person can see God as transgender. So why do we do this? There's a lot of work ahead. This is the community that has really pointed out the vilification and actually annihilation. We have members of this congregation who are trans. We have friends who are trans. I have students who are trans. And it's important for us to take some time to recognize what is happening to that community. For if they come for the trans people,